we like to kind of talk about current events and, you know, what's happening. And, of course, the big elephant in the room is the presidential election. After it, Jan actually called me to, you know, what are you thinking about it? Because who knew what to think, you know? What just happened? And what are your opinions now, Jan? How are you feeling about that? And I do have a reason. We're going to get back to the horse thing, but right now I just want to kind of get, you know, how you're feeling about it.
Yeah, it's very interesting because one of the reasons I called you was also because you posted that article by Starfire Tour about the timeline shifts. And I've been observing the election because, you know, I'm a Brit as a resident alien in the US. So I don't actually have a vote, but obviously anything that happens in here is going to impact me. So, I was very much uncomfortable with Trump. I was even more uncomfortable with Hillary, I have to say. And, you know, my view leading up to it was, you know, we've got, is it 300 million people here in the US? How have we ended up with these two candidates? It's just bizarre. But given that I teach neutrality, I was trying to practice my own teaching and really stay neutral and just kind of observe and suspend judgment to see how things are panning out. Because I have a very strong belief that whatever happens, there is a higher purpose to it. And as I was seeing the pre-election campaigning proceed, I was very aware of how it was generating a lot of division. And of course, post-election, the level of hysteria on social media has been phenomenal. And I read the Starfire Tour article, which, for anybody who hasn't read it, it's really about, and her article is based on scientific research that she's done into timeline shifts and timeline reboots. And the gist of the article was saying that there were two possible timelines. One was going to lead to nuclear disaster, and the other was not. And as she proceeded, there's a whole series of posts that lead to the conclusion that if Hillary had been elected as president, that would have led us to a nuclear disaster, and with Trump as leader, it would not. It would avert that nuclear disaster. And that was purely on the basis of security issues. And of course, we've seen all the issues around Hillary's use of a personal server and the WikiLeaks stuff and everything else, and the policy to have open borders and to allow immigrants in without due diligence and so on. So that was the basis of the difference in the timeline. And when I spoke to you, Nancy, which was the day after, I think, when you pointed out to me that Donald Trump looked different when he did his victory speech from how he'd looked during the campaign, I actually brought it up on the computer, and it was like, wow. And the timeline reboot that Starfire Tour was talking about was saying that leading up to the election, this is connected with the solar flares and the solar activity that creates these reboots. There are a series leading up, in the days leading up to the election, and what was happening was they were trying to find the most evolved version of Donald Trump. And when you pointed out to me how he looked different, I thought, holy shit, you're right. You know, his hair looked different. I mean, that's easy to change, but his facial expressions looked different, and the media representation of him was showing some really bizarre facial expressions at times. But he was carrying himself in a whole different way. his deportment was one of leadership, of presence, of authority. And I think the more that we observe what's going on, particularly in the media and on social media, is that there's so much disinformation out there to try to influence people's view, perspective on things. And that this man has been elected. I've seen other posts that say it's for a higher purpose. His role as executioner of the old paradigm, of the old cabal-driven system, even one that said he was a reincarnation of Saint Germain. And I'm really, let's say I'm observing with detachment and with interest to see how this unfolds. I do believe that Hillary would have taken us down a disastrous route. I didn't like a lot of the stuff I saw in the media about Trump, but I have to trust in a higher purpose, and I have to trust that this is for the highest benefit of everybody. And I also believe that this election has been absolutely instrumental in this whole ascension process that we're going through, in terms of really bringing to the surface so much stuff that has to be healed in people, in individuals, core issues and so on. And really also making a choice between getting into the fear, the hate, the anger, all those negative egoic emotions around this, or choosing the higher self response of trusting in the higher power, really living that spiritual approach of forgiveness and love and compassion and all these other higher emotions, that without which you are locking yourself into 3D. And I've actually felt that, and I've been a little more vocal on Facebook, that what I teach in my coaching and mentoring practice about neutrality and mindfulness needs to be heard about what choice are you actually making here. If you're choosing division, if you're choosing fear, oh my God, Trump's in, that's it, we're finished. If you're choosing hate, this is actually self-destructive. It's locking you into 3D. If we want to ascend, we have to get into a 5D vibration, into a 5D thinking, into a 5D feeling. And I've actually been quite surprised at some of the reactions in that spiritual conscious community, even from people who are fairly big names in that arena, in terms of how they've reacted to the results of the election.
I thank you so much, because you're seeing it just the way I am. Last night we had a conversation with somebody who had been so against Trump from the beginning that it was like palatable. She would get physically ill if you even mentioned his name. And even though I had talked to her, just like you're saying, let's just, there apparently is a timeline change. This is not the same man. Give him, support. Think positively towards him. We're not following him. We're using him to make the changes that we need to make, blah, blah, blah. And she was back in the fear mode, to the point of, she is Jewish, and we talked to her about, well, where's this fear coming from? And she went back to the concept of how she was brought up, and she's my age, 65-ish, and in the 60s someplace, and back to being brought up in a Jewish environment where the Holocaust was always sort of like right there in your face. And, at one time she said, yeah, well, you're going to see the trains, and I'm going like, no, I don't think so. But what she couldn't get was, I was not for him. I was not for the person that campaigned at all. But when I saw him, when he walked from behind the curtain and it was this different man, it was like I knew that this is not the same man. This is a timeline change. And that we really should support him because, like you're saying, this is part of the ascension, part of the evolvement of humanity. She could not understand how I had already seen for decades the growing octopus kind of control of Nazi philosophy through the United States, to the point that I was in more peril with a Hillary Clinton there than I am with a Donald Trump who's evolved. Who was an evolved being, not the one that was the campaigner. She just negated all of everything that she's ever heard me say about conspiracy stuff because it didn't fit her fear package. What I'm trying to say is that there's an awful lot of people out there that are being drawn back to fears that are coming from childhood. Fears of this and fears of that. But the more we got into it, the real fears are the same fears that everybody else has. The fear of the unknown, the fear of scarcity, the fear of hate, the fear of bigotry, the fear of narcissistic people trying to rule your life. All of these things that are very basic and human. So you've got these stories that give people permission to have fears, but when they address people of the metaphysical or the conspiracy or the truth agenda, we want the truth, they really do not understand the things that we understand. It's much like the horse with the water. They don't understand it. So they're afraid of it. They're actually afraid of what we've been trying to tell them. And so instead of, starting to listen to us, they go even deeper in fear. And I was up in New York, and my family was there, and they were all Hillary people, and I said to them, they started ranting about Trump. I said, look, there's not much you can do about it now. He's going to be president of the United States, so why don't you pray for him? Because they understand prayer. And they kind of looked at me a little odd, and then they went, yeah, okay, But the subject changed. It didn't go down that ranting anti-Trump thing. But then a few days later, I talked to her on the phone, and she's saying that she's very much afraid because since Trump was elected, she's got friends that are getting terrible things put on in their mailboxes because one of them is Latino and one of them is black, and that there's more hate crime happening. And it's like when I first became aware of the timeline shift was the timeline shift. I was live on radio. And I suddenly was very preoccupied with something what timeline. We just had I didn't think of it as we have had a shift. I thought of it as we can make a shift. And everybody, the media and everybody else sort of points at 8 o'clock when I started this discussion about the timeline change, that's when it was all happening. And then hearing Starfire Tour, where they were working towards that, actually, using what she calls psi energy to be able to make a change on a timeline. It all made me go and look at the images of Donald Trump. And when I did, because I remembered him with this red hair that doesn't look like much of a hair thing, it looked more like a thing that was on his head. He really looked ridiculous. And so I go to the pictures, and you see, 2/3 of the pictures were of this redheaded, just as I remembered him, but there were a few with white. Of course, some of the pictures were the pictures that we'd seen that, during that speech when he walks out and he looks so different. And there was a few other ones with like gray hair. I mean, it wasn't, but 2/3 of them were all red. So I left the link up, and then when I was shutting down, I was shutting down the links, and I saw it again. Only this time, almost all of the photographs were with white hair and gray hair, and that's the Mandela effect. Now, this was one of the clearer indicators of how to address the Mandela effect, because what's happening is you got two timelines: the campaigner and the president-elect. And so now these two timelines are actually vying for our energy. Who's gonna put enough energy in to keep the one dominant? Okay, think in terms of dominant one, And it was obvious to me that the dominant one at that moment was the one where he's an ascended being, not ascended being, but he's different. He's different from the campaigner. This guy looks different, he acts different, he talks different. Okay? So obviously that was where the energy was. Well, after hearing all this stuff about fear and shit, last night I said, well, I'm just going to check. And I go back over to the pictures, and don't you know the red is starting to come back again? It wasn't all white and gray. It's now the old pictures are starting to come back. So what I see happening is I really do see this concept of two timelines, and right now we've got an awful lot of people out there that are very afraid, that are putting out a tremendous amount of energy directed towards what they consider Donald Trump, which is the campaigner. And so because they're putting their focus on him, they're actually drawing us back into that old timeline.
Yeah. Interestingly, a few days after I looked at the Starfire Tour stuff that was on the Cosmic Reality group, and I actually read the whole, well, I won't say the whole site, but I delved into it. I also was directed to a YouTube video about how to shift timelines. And I thought, that's very interesting, because, with the Starfire Tour being all about timelines, and then getting this video about how you can create your own timeline shift into the paradigm that you want, I thought, this is underscoring that there's a lot to this. And I think also, I really feel it's important for us to understand this, not to be challenging these people on their fear, but to give them a way of releasing themselves from it. And I don't know if I'm using the right words here, but
maybe it's giving them an alternate way of going.
Yeah. Because one of the things that I was prompted to do, I've been a great fan of the I Ching for quite some years now. And I've actually got an app on my Kindle that I actually do an I Ching oracle reading every day. And it is so much about not getting into ego, not getting into judgment, and the readings were so appropriate for the circumstances that we're seeing at the moment in this really extreme, and I call it hysteria because there's no other word for it. In some cases, it's absolutely hysteria. So I started posting an I Ching reading each day that was so importantly related to our choices of how to respond to this. And so it's as Starfire Tour says, she actually prefixes all her articles with do not post anything political. Do not post any opinions. This is all about truth. This is about getting to the truth. And people are being presented with the biggest opportunity to get into their truth. Is your truth about still being locked into that egoic reaction, that disempowered reaction of the victim of fear and anger and hate? Or are you going to step up and actually step back and ask yourself, what is this triggering in me? Why is it triggering? Is it serving me to allow myself to be triggered in this way? How is that going to resolve the situation? How is that going to create the outcome that I want? What do I need to change in the way I respond to this to actually move in the direction that I want to move in? And, you know, I hate to go, I don't want to raise the horse thing again, but that's exactly what the horses taught me. When you're on a horse that's about to explode underneath you, if you go into fear, if you react in focusing on the problem, not the solution, you pretty damn soon end up flat on the ground and in the worst case scenario, seriously injured, but that's of your own making because of how you reacted. If you step into your power and you focus on the outcome that you want, you focus on how you can mindfully respond to situations, how you can contribute to the manifestation through the collective consciousness of the paradigm that we want to be living in, instead of getting stuck in what we don't want, then, you know, this is the choice that we're all being asked to make at this time.
Couldn't agree with you more. Now, how do we address these? See, my friend was, you know, I'm saying I actually said it a couple times yesterday. I said, look it, before you can heal a boil, it has to come to a head. And these concepts of bigotry and of, you know, the putting up walls and fear and all of this sort of thing, they were always there. The fact that the election shows that there is a great deal of despair amongst the white population can be absolutely understood from the concept of, in many ways, they see the ethnic community to be eroding their own lifestyle. The jobs are gone. The schools, you know, are preferential towards others than the whites, in the whites' minds. And that this was a breeding ground of real discontent and probably hate. And so now, because of what the campaigner said, everybody's focused on it. Well, he's a racist. Is he? You know, if you start to look at what was actually said, not what the soundbite said, you get a different perspective on the man. Is he a narcissist? Well, a narcissist is somebody that thinks that they're better than anybody else. Donald Trump was raised with Norman Vincent Peale as his minister. And Norman Vincent Peale, you would know him from the power of positive thinking. And one of his main laws is that you picture where you want to be, what you want to do. And no matter what life throws at you, just keep that picture. And it will lead you to success. You will eventually get to that picture. Reality is what we think it is. So is it narcissism, or is it the fact that he understands positive thinking? Because both of them would look the same to us. You know, no, he's got an image in his head, and he's saying, it's okay, everything is fine, don't worry about it, you know, we're going to go there. And in fact, he demolished the Republican Party and then demolished the Democratic Party. And he paid for it with his own money. Probably the only person, or the only type of person that could have done what he did is somebody that's a billionaire. So what do we do, or how do we address, or because you are an amazing health coach that makes people understand their own powers. What kind of message can we give to people that are still in that fear mode? And, you can't underestimate it. I don't underestimate it. Plus the fact that I think they're also being mucked with EMF. An EMF signal, like a Wi-Fi signal, can carry an emotional signal. An emotion is a frequency. They can put hate on you, and you're feeling hate, and you don't even know where it's coming from. It's coming from the Wi-Fi. That's why I'm one of these, my mission is to get Shungite to the masses. But regardless of that, wherever these thoughts are coming from, what can we tell people? How can we give them anything to kind of mitigate the outside influences that they're being subjected to? Because they're seeing the people in the streets scared, and although I gotta tell the audience, I did see Craigslist, and it had a posting, and it said, if you want to become a protester, we'll pay you $15 an hour. Now, was that put in by somebody who was just making it look like that, or was it real? I don't know. I can't determine that, but I actually saw a Craigslist that said that. So, you got any ideas, Jan?
Yeah.
Good.
Well, first of all, I actually posted on Cosmic Realities Group the latest article from Starfire Tour, which is to do with Soros's involvement in these protests. So that's worth looking at, Cosmic Reality Group, to read that and how he's played a role in all of this. And, if you look, I always like to go to the source. I don't like to deal with the symptoms. And what we're seeing here in the reaction to this election, and I mean that on both sides. On the one side, you've got the reaction of the Hillary supporters that are devastated by the loss of Hillary's campaign. On the other hand, I've seen some very extreme behaviour by people on the so-called winning side. And in fact, I actually posted, this was before the election, there was a video on YouTube by somebody who is, I can't remember Stephen, I can't remember his name, anyway. But he's been putting this in the context of the restoration of the Republic. And he was basically talking about the WikiLeaks. Actually, not the WikiLeaks. It was to do with the exposure of the Wiener emails and the issues around the paedophilia and so on, and the connections with Epstein and the Lolita Express and everything to do with that. And I actually posted a comment that said, but I've seen Trump being accused of unlawful sex with a 13-year-old on Epstein's Island. And it was a question, isn't this also something that needs to be looked into? And the response was so vitriolic, and it was, you're an idiot, you're an absolute idiot, this is rubbish, it's been disproved. So I came out and said, look, I'm not a Trump supporter, all I want to know is the truth of this. Can you post me the information that says that this case was thrown out? And I got this response that said, oh, sorry for the insult, here's the link. And I think the role that we have is by disengaging from this conflict situation, for one thing, in being instrumental in the bringing the truth to the surface rather than the propaganda and the manipulated messages that are coming out. The other thing we have to be aware of is that the agenda of the current paradigm is to stimulate the ego to the nth degree through fear. So people have had their ego brought into absolute power, and they are ruled by the ego, which is completely fear-based. So it's no surprise, really, that those who don't understand the ego and who have worked with great diligence to move into a different mindset, that they should have been absolutely stimulated by everything that's happened over the last, 18 months. So in my view, what we have to do is we have to go beneath the current situation. If we try and challenge people at the symptom level, which is challenging their belief in their chosen representative, their chosen presidential candidate, all we're going to get is push back. What we have to do is present the underlying alternative. What does it feel like to be in fear? What does it feel like to be angry? What does it feel like to carry hatred in your heart? Does that feel good? Is that actually going to bring you the kind of world that you want to live in? What are the alternatives to that? You know, what if you could shift that feeling even into neutral? You know, I talk a lot about the power of neutrality, how everything in the universe is meaningless until we assign an interpretation to it. And we can either choose to assign a negative interpretation or a positive or even a neutral. Well, it's really irrelevant. It's so trivial it doesn't matter. But if we can teach people that they have the power of choice and they have the power of choosing something that will serve them rather than something that will destroy them from within, without reference to the things that are their trigger points, I really believe that's the way to do it. Really at the causal level, at the deep level, at the inner level, rather than at the symptomatic external level. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but the problem that I have with it, okay, is that the only way I see, what my problem is that the only way that I know how to explain that deeper meaning, that deeper level, is by saying, well, but you're all screwed up to begin with. You're being manipulated to begin with. The banks are fantasies. There's all sorts of evil that's out there. These people have been, involved with some very evil act. You got to go to the conspiracy thing to explain it was wrong to begin with. It's broken, and yet they won't believe you because they've never believed you. They've never gotten that far. So what's the other alternative explanation that can draw them in without drawing them into confronting, what is it that they call it? Disturbing facts.
It's cognitive dissonance.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's through, it is a very fine line to tread, and I'm not saying it's easy by any means. The way I explain manifestation is, a lot of people in that kind of law of attraction community are very into positive thinking, ignore the problems, ignore all of that negative stuff. What I believe is that you can have an awareness of a problem without feeding it energy. You kind of literally hold it at the back of your mind. So I'm aware that this is a problem, but I'm going to put all my focus on the outcome. And what I feel is the way to address this is we know all the stuff that's what they call the conspiracy theory, which we know as conspiracy fact. But we don't have to focus on what's wrong in order to lead them into something that's right. I mean, I'm not a Christian in the religious sense of the word, but, you know, Jesus's preachings, he didn't go and attack everything that was wrong. Yeah, he might have thrown the money changers out of the temple, but he was leading people into what was right. So if we can present people with alternatives that they see as being solutions to the problem, while not challenging their belief system that just brings immediate resistance, that to me is the way to go forward. Look at it this way, you know. How about looking at it this way? You know, people that promote solar energy don't do it by attacking conventional sources as, oh, this is so terrible, you've got to stop driving your car and da da da. What they do is they present an alternative that says, how about using this for your house? This could bring you all these benefits. And so there is a way, if we can...
Okay, would that way be talking in terms of energy, of positive thinking, of praying? Why don't you follow Christ? You know, can you give me some kind of solid ways that you would address it?
I think it's you know, positive thinking is in many cases unfocused. I think it's really about outcome thinking rather than problem thinking. And yes, in some cases it's, you know, it can be praying, it can be asking for guidance, but a lot of the people that we're talking about here aren't spiritually connected. And the other thing is to remember, of course, Nancy, is that we're dealing with, I always like to step back in this and say, okay, we need to look at this from the helicopter view. We're all on this earth plane for a reason. We're all living out our own purpose. We are all actually in this major role play. And it's very interesting. I had an exchange on Facebook the other day with somebody who's a connection who I've never met, lives in Oklahoma, thinks the sun shines out of Bill and I for some reason. And he put a post up and said he was feeling really weird, in his words, because a family member had died, and this particular family member had caused all sorts of problems in the family, had been really obnoxious, horrible, and even he used the word evil. But yet he still feels saddened by it. And he couldn't understand why he was feeling the way he was. So I put a response up that said, Steve, you feel this way because you're love at the core. And how wonderful for that family member to have played a role to enable you to discover that. And he was blown away by this and said he'd shared it with all his family members to help them come to terms with the death of this person who, had, in his words, had really been quite evil. And it brought back to me a conversation I'd had with a guest on our radio show that referred to the book by Neil Donald Walsh called The Little Soul and the Sun. And it was all to do with this role play that we've come into this incarnation to fulfill. And the conversation was, this little soul was saying, I'd really like to learn forgiveness. And the other soul that was going to do the role play, who was making a soul contract, said, well, what I'd really like is for you to remember that when I do all these really awful things to you, you remember that I actually love you and I'm only doing this to help you. And this prompted me to put up this meme on Facebook saying, how can we learn forgiveness if we've got nothing to forgive? And what I'm trying to do is to get people to raise their view, to see this in a much bigger context of what this paradigm is all about, that we have the choice to move into that loving, forgiving, beautiful higher self of neutrality, of non-judgment, and all of that. And we also have the choice to get stuck in that egoic, fearful, hating, victim, angry, you know the rest, all the negative. But some people aren't ready yet. We're all at different stages of evolution. So to actually expect to be able to turn a huge proportion of the current humanity on this planet around into a different paradigm is probably actually not in alignment with their level of evolution at this point. So it's really about sowing the seeds for those people that are ready to be open to a different paradigm, to a different perspective, and accept the greatest respect we can give to people is to respect where they are on their path. It's not our job to do an evangelical, let's convert everybody. It's about the bridge from where they are to where we can lead them. It's opening up the possibility of a different perspective. And some people are just not going to be open to that, and we need to accept that. But for those people that do want something different, who are ready to awaken, we can offer them a helping hand across that bridge.
I think you just did give a lot of people a helping hand across that bridge. I just so appreciate and respect what you do, Jan. One of my favorite people. Please tell your website so that people and the services that you actually have on the site.
Okay. The website to go to is asmilingworld.org. Our vision is to create a smiling world. And my role is as a spiritual empowerment and intuitive success coach, and actually helping people to really address the fear issues, the things that are holding them back, getting over that not good enough perception of themselves and really becoming unstoppable. So if you go to smilingworld.org, you can get a free copy of the Dream Achiever Success Kit, and that's what I'm all about. It's helping people to step into their fullest power, live their truth, and achieve their dreams.
Well, I like I say, you've helped me get to an understanding of it, and I hope other people have too, of how we can help everybody without getting them pissed off at us. You know,
Thank you.
Very key to life, you know. Don't get anybody pissed off at you. I thank you so much for being here. Like I say, give a hug to Bill. Bill is her husband, by the way.
Yes, I will.
Awesome man. And you know, hug the puppies for me.
Will do. And I've so enjoyed having the opportunity to horse talk with Emily as well.
Well, you know, I wasn't really sure about how the chat would, you know, but I went over at the break and I looked at the chat and they were very engaged in it. So yeah,
Good.
I think that everybody learns, because I was sitting here going like, well, this isn't much different than just dealing with people, you know, human beings. And in a very basic way, you know, it was like, yeah, and it was fascinating.
Well, I have to say, sorry, Nancy, before we finish, I was going to say, you know, that horse, that Andalusian called Voto, his name was Devoto. He taught me so much about how to help the people that I work with in my coaching and mentoring practice how to overcome fear, how to manifest through visualization. I mean, the principles that these animals can teach us are so profound as when you're tuned into them. So much of what I learned through my experience with horses, I pass on to my clients, and it's just been such a gift. I cannot put into words how influential they've been in my life.
It's very inspiring. I thank you so much for sharing. Emily, you're going to be up next. Your show, you know what you're going to be talking about? You want to?
Yeah, I'm actually going to be continuing from last week with Irish folklore. And I had a request from the chat to do a segment on what I learned from my horses this week, so we're going to add that in. Oh,
excellent. Excellent. Colleen, you got Emily coming up, so Jan and I will fade off into the woodwork or whatever it does.
To the sunset.
We hang up from
the ether.
Into the ethers, yes. Let's go ether hopping here. Thanks, everybody, for listening to us. You've been listening to the Say What Show with Jan Moore as our guest, and Emily Norcross as our co-host, and Colleen Kelly and myself. And just have a great week. Tomorrow I will be on Simon Says. Simon Parks has got his show that starts at 2 Eastern Time, and then Walt and I will talk about what Simon says. It's the easiest show we do because we just, what did he say? What does that mean? I'd have to take notes, though. But we'll be there at 4 o'clock. So appreciate everybody. Be safe, and see you next time. Thanks.
You've been listening to Say What on Haggy Shack Radio at haggyshack.com. Simulcast to Wolf Spirit Radio.